Thanks everyone for joining our webinar today. I am Gavin Linsley. I'm a sales account manager here at Sycle. And we are joined here by Brad Dodson and Dr. Joe Motzko. We're going to be highlighting BlueWing today. And we started this integration with BlueWing about a year ago, and we did a webinar then and went through the features and benefits that BlueWing has to offer. And now we're revisiting that. We wanted to go through and talk about those features and benefits again, but also to bring on a Sycle customer that is using BlueWing and seeing some great success. So we are happy to have Dr. Joe Motzko join us here today with Brad and kind of go through his experiences. And we're excited to have you here today, Brad.
Thanks, Gavin. Nice to be here. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And you're right, it's actually been a year and a half. The last presentation we did was on February 3rd last year. So we're fully into almost a year and a half now. Of course, there's been a lot more work happening in the background before we got to this stage. But yeah, I'm excited and very excited to have Joe with us here as well. Joe, let's see if your mic's good. Say hi to everyone.
My mic works. How's everybody doing today?
Oh, that's good. Joe is with the Hearing Center, ACE Hearing Centers. Joe, I'll let you introduce yourself and give us a bit of an overview. But thanks for being here.
Sure, no problem. So we've been working with Sycle for a long time, and we've been working with BlueWing for the last couple of years. We have 5 practices in Northeast Pennsylvania. We'll look at those on a map in a few minutes. We've had great success with BlueWing and Sycle, and all they work together to put together a great program.
Yeah, and you know, Joe, when we started this, Dr. Szyminski as well, your partner and the owner of the practice, you know, we went through quite a bit of work to just make sure everyone was comfortable with A, the integration, and B, you know, how this is all going to work over time. And kudos to everyone for sticking with the program. And I think the results will speak for themselves. But like with anything, marketing certainly is something that needs to be done consistently. So appreciate you guys for participating with me and sticking it through here. So let's get started here. I'm going to move through things fairly fast because we'd like to keep it to a half hour here today. We'll be recording all of this for everyone and take some questions at the end if needed. I'd like to start here. And as I mentioned, we're now a year and a half into this integration, and it's opened our eyes so much into just what works, what doesn't work, where the consistencies need to be. More importantly, just transparency for everyone involved. And I think that's where these partnerships really do help our customers, big and small. I mean, honestly, this really helps those folks who have a smaller, footprint to folks larger, 200, 300, 400 plus. It really does offer value across the board. I like to start here because for me and what we've noticed over time, and not just the last year and a half, but truly over time, marketing and hearing care, you know, there's always a good, for me, there's got to be a good place to start. And it's what we can measure and how we can measure it so that we can see all the other marketing vehicles that we have employed in our practice, improving response either way, and or, improving or not helping either way. So in my mind, the best approach, at least on the direct mail side, is to incorporate these kind of 3 phases, these 3 prongs, if you may. Quarterly newsletters, of course, your existing customers are always going to be a great, opportunity for upgrades and bringing folks into the practice again. New candidate prospecting, that's very important. Clearly, that's just the lifeblood of building, new opportunities and working with new candidates. And of course, automated trigger marketing. And this was really the essence of getting started with Sycle in this capacity so that we could build this trigger marketing program that was truly hands-off and truly set and forget. And then a 4th layer on top of that is some of our what we term, prospect triggers as well, which is new mover stuff, working with folks who are moving into the neighborhoods around the practices. And I'll talk about that in a second. What you're looking at on the screen really is a great example without Matchback transparency here of what a program looks like when we're doing and running on all three cylinders here versus something that's just done on an ad hoc basis. Really, the prospecting on the third column you're looking at here, and then next to that column, prospect comparison, is a comparison of consistent marketing over time. Let's call this every other week for prospecting. And you can see just the difference between that and just running a one-off program or a one-off marketing piece. The numbers speak for themselves on that. So I can't speak highly enough of a more consistent plan, and we'll get into that in a second. I do want to touch a little bit on the technology in the background here as this data comes in from Sycle, because it's very important for us, especially in an economy now where every penny counts, and making sure that we're reaching out to the right people. We have a very advanced artificial intelligence program behind the scenes that take data for your particular customer base, and it uses that and it grows from that. It evolves and uses that to find folks who look just like your existing patients around your practices. It's very successful because when you have a limited budget, you have to focus it on the right people, and the pool of prospects could get very large depending on how rural or urban your practice might be. And there has to be a way for us to rank and score every one of those particular participants or every one of those prospects around the practice, so that we can get a good sense of just how close they resemble an existing purchaser or customer of yours. And I'll show you how we do that in a second. This is important on our side because it shows the difference between a traditional approach and a modeled prospect approach. The traditional approach really just kind of categorizes folks based on very two-dimensional or linear demographics. Age, income would be the first two that most people use. A modeled approach takes your existing customers and it's able to run through a full spectrum of prospects that are not existing patients of yours and score them and literally give them a rank between 0 and 100. And allow us then to cherry pick from top to bottom the best candidates to reach out to. And so you'll see that the response models themselves continue to learn. We do this, I'm going to show you Joe's in a second, but they continue to learn as this new response data is fed back into the models and back into around your location. I can promise you around every location, they're all very different. You're probably all thinking to yourselves, aren't all hearing care patients the same? I can assure you they're not. And there's a lot of other demographics or behavioral and financial attributes that go into consideration here when we're building something specific for the practice. So I'm going to jump off of this for a second. And I'm going to go into this, what's called a customer profile. Joe, give us a little sense of these practices here, kind of newest to oldest on your end.
Sure. The original practice is Kingston. It's a suburb of Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, near Scranton. It's not I wouldn't call it a big city by any means, but it is a more densely populated area. After that, we took on Williamsport and Bloomsburg. Once again, more rural areas. It's kind of a city center surrounded by a lot of rural areas. Same thing with Lewisburg. Lewisburg has the benefit of being a college town as well. And then Hawley, that's a very rural area. The town's only about 1,600 people, but it draws from a significant area surrounding it because it is mostly a rural area and people there are used to driving a little bit of a distance to get to healthcare providers.
That's great. And then the newest
Kingston goes back 40 years and Hawley is 2 years. So it ranges from 40 to 2 years.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, that's quite a bit. And obviously Lewisburg, I think you said, was the newest, correct?
Correct. Yeah, Lewisburg was about last year.
Okay, that's great. And so what you're looking at here is, once that data is piped to us from Sycle, we're able to match that to our existing in-house prospect data that we get from V12 Axiom, a whole bunch of data vendors that it all comes together. And we're looking for a match here because we're trying to find the same folks that are, inside your data that have just very minimal first name, last name, full address info, possibly a date of birth, which doesn't really help too much. But when we match them to our data, now we have all the additional attributes of, financial, behavioral, and I'll show you that in a second. But what's fascinating to me, and I'll just use Hawley as an example, and I'll show you this in the data in a second. The more you have folks living around in certain neighborhoods, they've been there for a long time, the more likely they are to come in for hearing evals, or at least to hear from someone who has a hearing loss in that larger social circle. So length of residence, believe it or not, has such a huge role to play in whether people come. And you can see just in this area here, we've got folks on the same street. These little red dots are actually people in their homes. And I'm going to show you this on a broader scale, of course. So this is a look at the existing customer base as we've plotted it around the practice. These red circles are what we call the smart radius, or the marketable area around a practice. This is where 95% of patients are typically willing to travel from. So now that gives us a marketable area. Of course, you've got pockets of folks all around here. But when we're spending money on certain marketing vehicles, you have to determine what that most appropriate marketable area looks like. And that is what these red circles represent. We'll go with that in a second. But the data we're talking about here is the ability for us now to be able to look at different attributes, including age, obviously, income, all of those ones we talked about, but go a little deeper. It also allows us to look at the age demographics. And if we said, hey, let's go, for folks that are younger, 50 to 100 or 50 to 90 as an example. Well, only 10% of the existing patient base is representative of that 50 to 59 category. So we're still seeing a higher, an older age wearer. And that means that depending on the marketing vehicle, the more expensive ones, we want to focus specifically on folks that are converting at a higher level. But we look at education. This is very important for us. We're looking at income, as I mentioned to you, but as you can see on the income scale here, we've got folks that are below the 10. And I will remind everyone that the reason income is not a good attribute is because if you looked at occupations here, we've got a 20% retired community around these practices, right? So on a fixed income or no income at all reported, if you chose a 30K plus in your income attribute plus your age, you're going to miss out on almost 20% of folks that don't kind of meet that criteria. So I would say net worth is definitely a much better one. And here's the length of residence I mentioned earlier, something that plays a big part in our prospecting. 57% almost of customers or patients within this data set have been in their homes for more than 15 years. That's why you see those pockets of folks all the time, because they speak to each other, larger social networks. They typically tend to talk more about things like hearing loss, of course, so you can't hear, go get your hearing checked, and this is who you need to see. More exciting and kind of eye-opening than that is 76% of them donate money to local and national causes. I mean, this, if you're looking for two attributes above age or included with age, I certainly wouldn't be looking at income. There's no other attribute that offers the same combination of customers in this particular data set. Credit scores, of course, net worth, we look at all of it. So that's just an overview of the small, the top attributes that impact a model. And the reason we do that is so that we can now look at what the data looks like around these practices. It's all cleaned up. It's not scattered all over the place within the marketable areas. And what the data shows us is that when we remove the customers around the practices, we still have 100,000 lives or 100,000 households that meet a minimum age criteria around the practices that are not currently customers, right? And of course, we're able to look at this by location. Bloomsburg would just have a smaller number, and we can look at them individually or across the board. And what it does is it allows us now to figure out, based on the budget, the most appropriate radius or the most appropriate marketable area around each of the practices. So the lower the budget, the higher up in the score range we go. The higher the budget, the lower in the score range we're able to go, because you now have a bigger budget to reach out. But you can see very precise. It gives us the ability to market to the right audience based on the budget. So instead of setting arbitrary budgets, and I think, Joe, you can speak to this as well. In the past, it's always usually been, hey, we've got X number of dollars per location, and then, just building the budget that way, correct?
Correct, yeah. So typically we looked at, I think when we first started, we kind of did an even distribution across all the offices. Yeah. And then over time, we've kind of tailored the distribution to offices that maybe needed a little more new patients, or offices that were a little busy, we took some away and added to other offices. But yeah, I think that's kind of how we started it.
Yeah, and what's nice too is, these models, they don't really have a preference for location. What they do is they have a preference for opportunity. So you're looking at opportunity around each of the locations. So we can tailor the opportunity, tailor the budget to suit that opportunity, because ultimately across all of the 5 locations, we want to make sure that the program is successful. And so we might be overspending in Hawley. And I know, Joe, you work there, so you probably want us to spend more there. But
I would never say we're spending too little.
Based on opportunity, though, and depending on how rural like you said, and also the saturation of how many existing patients you have, we can adjust the budget by opportunity, which to us is a way better way to measure the success at the end of the day. So,
and one other thing with Hawley, one thing I'll jump in is the other offices, Kingston, Bloomsburg, Williamsport, and Lewisburg, were all existing practices, and Hawley was startup from nothing. So we did kind of want to put a bigger focus on that one because there was no patient history or patient list that we're starting with. It was all from scratch.
That's correct. I remember that, and it it takes a little bit, but you have to start. It's a brand new footprint, so very excited to see where we're at today with it as well. And this existing profile was kind of put together using these leading and trailing factors. You can see how they all have a role to play within the success of the marketing for this practice, for these practices. Of course, age and distance being the 2 major criteria for hearing aid response. The great part about this is it also helps us budget. So we know if we wanted to reach, just let me go back and explain. You're looking here, the score you're seeing here is not an age. This is actually a score range based on these leading and trailing factors. They literally score every prospect in the area, all 101,000 folks with a score of 0 to 100. The higher the score, the closer they look to and resemble an existing patient, and the lower the score, of course, the complete opposite. So we're, depending on the budget, we're able to then stay high or low in the score range. And you can look at this as a waterfall. ROI is highest at the top, and it starts to trail off closer to the bottom. So very simply, this gives us an opportunity to work with budgets and make sure that we are allocating the budget based on opportunity around each of the locations. So very handy tool for us. It makes us better marketers, and it obviously gives us a good indication to work with the clients to make sure that they are reaching out to the most appropriate candidates. Now, let me go back to the presentation here. We went through that. In addition to that prospecting, which is obviously a major part of the work we do with Joe and his team, working with Sycle to be able to put together a comprehensive trigger-based program really was a passion of mine, and I'm very excited that not only is it launched, but it's been running for over a year and a half. And we've taken the ability to work with certain triggers within the patient data on Sycle side and automate the outreach to customers. We've also expanded the different types of triggers, so out of warranty triggers, return triggers. This list just keeps growing, and that data that comes in on a regular basis, twice a week, the data is run for these particular rules that we have set up. Every client has obviously different triggers available. Joe has a set of triggers for each of his locations based on some of these recalls that they like to do. But we really look at a program like this more as an opportunity to just make sure that nothing's falling through the cracks. We're so busy every day, but to absolutely be able to automate this, nobody has to put lists together, do any creative, follow up on all of that. We're able to do all of it on our end. And
hey, Brad, can I just interject something here real quick?
Please do.
Yeah, I love this trigger program. These are things that we were doing in the past ourselves or talked about doing, but could never keep up on because you're just so busy with your normal day-to-day operations. And we still have a lot of paper charts because we've been in business a while. And so just to pull charts for warranties and no-shows and the age of hearing aids, we could pull that out of Sycle into an Excel spreadsheet, but it was still a lot of work to turn that into a mailing or a letter. And this has just been so much easier, taking so much work off of some of our staff's hands of just trying to keep on top of these, warranty expirations and aging devices and all sorts of stuff. It's just been really, really nice.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. And yeah, I think maybe the biggest, apart from being able to now look at some of the success of the program from an ROI perspective, as you said, I think just kind of freeing up staff time, no more licking envelopes and stamps and having to look at that yourselves. Now, look, a lot of questions folks have had is just, I'm not sure if the data is good enough or perfect or however I put my data in. A lot of this stuff is hard coded into device dates and expiration dates and things like that Sycle does fantastically. So if anything, this is a great opportunity to clean up the data. It does it for you because you'll have folks calling, making appointments and things like that. So it's certainly a good opportunity to look at it in a couple of ways, not only just to automate it all for you, but also help you make sure that it gets cleaned up in the end of the day as well. So full patient automation, there's no cost to get it all set up, to work with us and work with Sycle. There's a cost per piece that we can, certainly reach out to you afterwards if you're interested in understanding more about that. But the ease of use for this, there's no minimums, there's no requirement to get, have it a certain way. And everything is obviously completely customizable for your practice. So that was a nice addition with this integration with Sycle. I'm going to then move on here because I think in addition to not only being able to work with this data, use this data to help benefit your practice from a new candidate perspective, the trigger program, making sure that every patient and recalls are done on a very consistent basis. Like I said, it happens twice a week for 52 weeks with no involvement from any staff whatsoever. The next question is, how do we kind of report on this? And this is really where the rubber hits the road, just for everyone. Call tracking has consistently been a resource for us to see whether or not programs are successful and how they're working, and they still continue to be a used resource. But they're also two-dimensional in the fact that we're pushing so many customers to go digital. We're telling folks that we have all these platforms that they can reach out to us on, and we explain the value of that. We have typically digital programs and marketing programs in place, and so the customers and new candidates typically use those vehicles as well, which means tracking lines, whether they get a mail piece and they go to Google or they go to Facebook and they use a line there, or they call off that if they prefer. Yeah, so it doesn't give us the full picture. Attribution continues to be a conversation in marketing, but we need to make sure that we're measuring on a bunch of different, or at least measuring a bunch of different ways. One of them being what we call a matchback. And this is what I'm going to show you next. I'm going to jump off of this. The ability now for us to track the data directly from Sycle for our integrated users, track the way that everything is trending in terms of response rates. This is fantastic from just an overall health of the industry perspective, and then of course going further down into just the health of your practice and how it all works. So essentially, a matchback is simple. It takes all of the quantities that are done, whether they patient or prospect or trigger-based quantities. It obviously has a cost associated. It's tracking appointments. So as soon as the mail lands in home, the tracking starts to happen. It's looking for full name, full address in the Sycle appointment file, and it's looking to see if those appointments are coming in. It's got a 30-day open window because mail lands, and then it's going to take a couple of days. People don't call right away. They don't make appointments right away. So it's tracking all of that on the back end. And then as those campaigns continue to run, tracks one per campaign. It also looks at, hey, was there a purchase further down the track? I mean, we've done over 10 million pieces for our Sycle customers. It looks at the purchasers. It looks at the hearing aid volumes. It's giving us an ROI. It's telling us a cost per appointment and cost per hearing. And Joe, you can talk to this a little bit too. I mean, the value of this data, I think internally is just, exponential, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Because we track everything here. If this didn't work, we wouldn't continue to use it. No offense to you, Brad. But we track everything, and it's so hard to track newspaper ads versus Facebook versus Google. So it's nice to have this integration where we don't only have to track it. If someone buys a hearing aid, it gets matched back, and it's pretty easy. It also gives us a nice, clean look at our return on investment and our cost per appointment, which for a lot of other types of advertising and marketing can be quite opaque, and you don't quite know, or it doesn't get reported correctly with your front desk staff, or the person doesn't report it correctly when they come in, or so it becomes very difficult to track a lot of marketing. And this has been very helpful in us realizing the value of this program.
Well, and Joe, that's great. And I think in addition, like I said, because attribution is very hard to track. Someone saw this, they went to Facebook, or they got something on Facebook. There are multiple touch points that are needed to bring in customers. This is certainly not giving all credit to this particular marketing vehicle, but it is a great place to see consistently how your whole marketing plan and all of your marketing that you're doing is impacting, because this is at least a true, very consistent response measurement that you can see for all the practice. Of course, this expands into by location, by creative. We know whether we're doing postcards or whether we're doing letters. I mean, the data will, for all the folks out there that enjoy seeing a lot of data, this will probably be more than you can handle. But it's giving us these trends so that we are not making rash decisions in our marketing or jumping from one to the other. We need to have very consistent points that we can trust. We need to know if the data is correct, the creative is correct, and the time of year is correct. Because if you were just marketing in May, as an example, you can see appointment rates are literally half. And that's across the board. So if you just doing this sporadically, you may not have taken advantage of the Jan through April times that were really good. And I'll go a step further and go into the hearing centers pieces here specifically. At a 0.74%, industry average is about a 0.2%. So when these three programs come together, you start to see a lot more value from your program and from your from the marketing that you're doing. And I'll go even a step further in this and just look at the triggers. And this is just the patient triggers that are going out. Joe and I started this in December of 21. That's when we turned the taps on. We have about a 26% response rate on all the triggers. The ones we're looking at that really make sense to me, especially from a marketing perspective, all of the upgrade triggers, the warranty triggers, those are the triggers that show us the value and show us immediate, ROI. So the ROI on these pretty staggering, cost per appointment, cost per device. So if anything,
and that makes sense, right? Because these are people who are previous hearing aid users. They've already sought out treatment in the past. So it makes sense that they'd have a much higher rate than just the general public. Absolutely.
But we would never have known that rate if we weren't able to meticulously track that. So that to me is incredible.
Absolutely.
That to me is hey, the stuff works, right? Especially if you're seeing hearing aid sales coming off of it from, let's say, an upgrade 3, 4, 5 year letter, right? Or a warranty expiration letter as an example. Okay, I'll go back into this. And we're coming up to the end now. I wanted to show you, we've gone through that. So really the benefits, the powerful reporting, I think, just helps to bring it all together. The piece de resistance right at the end. But honestly, a program like this wouldn't be successful without, meticulous work on all fronts. Sycle for the work they do on their ends to make sure the data is piped to us on an on-demand basis. Obviously, making sure creative is at a high enough quality to service the client needs, and then just making sure that the client, that we all agree on those points that we're measuring to make sure that we understand the success of these programs. So I'm gonna let Joe, if you have any further things you'd like to add at the end here. Otherwise, we can open up for questions. Gavin, if you've got some questions too.
I would just say it's been a great partnership. We've been working together for a couple of years now, and it's the creatives that come for our approval usually require almost zero work on our part to update, to amend them. They're usually very good, very creative, and we can see increases in our call rates and our appointments every 2 weeks when these things go out. So I mean, it's something that we've been very happy with, and we continue to use at all of our locations just because it has driven a lot of business. We've helped a lot of people in the process.
Very kind of you, Joe. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I'll say from my end, first of all, just those that are starting to ask some questions in the chat box, if you don't mind using the Q&A box that's over on the far right-hand side of at the bottom of your screen, we will answer those in the chat box. But, for me, a lot of the time when I am talking to our customers about BlueWing and things, in my mind, I'm just thinking, they create these great pieces that get sent out. And a lot of time I forget all the AI and everything that goes behind it. And so it's so much more than just creating a nice piece of paper to send out to their patients, and so there's a lot more to it that really makes BlueWing make sense. And yeah, I love all the automation behind it. I think going back to something that Joe said, as you're in your office, you think that, hey, we're pretty on top of this, but unless it's automated, it's not as consistent as it would be if you just had it automated. So the automation helps a lot. Consistency in this industry, we know, is key to get those patients back in the door and having those touch points. So now let's jump in here. I'm just going to look at the two here that were asked in the chat. Says, how does it work if you have no database? What do you use for mailers?
It is challenging, and Joe can speak to this too, working, I'm assuming this would be a new practice that doesn't have anything to start with. Listen, minimal data is a good start, so I'm sure there's at least a little something that we can look at. It's not entirely necessary. The trigger program is great because it starts as you bring on new customers, so that should always be set up in the background waiting. You don't have to have any data yet to get that started. So there's probably, that's the best time to get started, is when it's just starting. As far as what we would use, we've been in hearing care for a very, very long time, and there's some tried and tested ways of doing this where we can use national models. The advantage of using the models that we do with Joe and his team is that he has just a tremendous amount of data, customer data, that helps us evolve those models so that they become they're just smarter, and they are able to validate and pick prospects much quicker and faster. So that just happens and grows as your database grows, right? But in the beginning, there are some off-the-shelf models that have been tried and tested in hearing care forever. So they would definitely be very valuable in picking that. And in terms of the actual content itself that is used, again, very customized for the practice. That's definitely more of a consultative conversation to see what's been done in the past and where we would go in the future.
Great. Looks like Chris has a question here. He says, I just switched from HearForm to Sycle in December, and we were trying to get our data caught up to date. I feel that we're at least 6 months away.
Yeah, and like for that, I would again suggest there's no good time and no bad time to get started, especially the integration. It doesn't matter what the data looks like at this point. If you feel more comfortable waiting, that's fine. If you prefer, to get started on some of those triggers now, you certainly can do that. So honestly, it really doesn't matter from that front. Nothing goes out unless everything's approved. So you have no concerns with stuff, having to go out unless it's, obviously ready to go.
Right. And then it looks like we have Romy that is interested in a one-on-one conversation with you. They already use our mailings. It looks like our CRM are built in Sycle, but it says that yours looks more sophisticated and customizable. I would just say that the difference is the creative and the artwork's kind of set up on the background versus set up there in the system. So it's not you having to put the artwork in to get that out. It's really the other way around. It's kind of trigger rule first, pick your trigger, and then confirm and approve your creative, and then from there these start to go out. So customizable in that sense, and definitely a little less hands-on than what you may have experienced. Of course, both systems work, but for us, it's about trying to improve efficiency. Great. It looks like that was Steve that answered that question. He gave us his contact info, but Steve, you can also reach out to Brad with his information that's up on the screen right now. But we'll make sure that Brad gets your information there, Steve, so you guys can touch base and have some more in-depth conversation. Any other questions that we have for today?
Looks like that's it for today, Gavin.
Yeah. Anything else that you wanted to add, Joe, before we close things out today?
No, I think it was a very great presentation. Like I said, it was a very abbreviated presentation. The amount of stuff, you've talked about us in the past, on our monthly calls and stuff. I feel like this is just scratching the surface of what's all involved. from what you guys are providing.
Yeah, thank you. And we're excited to keep growing this with everyone. And thanks to the Sycle folks. And Joe, thank you to you for participating with us today. Gavin, for adminning this. Very appreciative and look forward to doing another one soon.
Yeah, appreciate everybody for joining, and everybody have a wonderful day.